So, Katherine, I know you've been a mentor, certainly an educator, um, and I have seen and heard you share that passion with students and inspire them to further their academic pursuits. That is a labor in and of itself. In addition to being, a writer, in addition to, what you pursue personally, to be able to share that passion with students is critically important, especially in our profession with the lack of demographics for people of color, for women. It's an inspiration for other people to see in you the fact that they can accomplish the same. So earlier we shared how we are ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I've seen you do extraordinary things with the students at Howard. I've seen you do extraordinary things through your teaching, through your passion for educating. And I certainly have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to our group today, and hope that this is just the first of many dialogues that we have with you, with Renal, with other people that then can bring to bear their excitement and energy and certainly their endeavors for creating a better world through our built environment and the passion that we have for design and construction. So that said, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being part of this.
Thanks for the Atlanta HU crew for inviting me.
Absolutely.
It's been great to put this together. So Renal probably spent a lot of time on projects because he is knee deep in those as a firm leader. I am less on that side, so I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of my path and what I'm doing now, but then also a little bit about the numbers. Garfield asked me to share a little bit about the statistics and sort of like where we stand as far as African Americans and especially on the women's side in architecture. So as you see from my photos and my face, I am neither white nor male. And although it's hard to track nationally because each state regulates licensure, this means that I don't fit in the box of what people assume as an architect. The profession is predominantly 80% white and 80% male. And despite that, I've been an architect for about 11 years as a licensed architect, and then working in the profession for over 20 years. And so since I sort of don't fit in that normal box, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got into architecture, because I think that's important, to look at how people come to this profession. Renal talked a little bit about meeting someone who was an architect as a young person. And for me, it was similar. So I actually met an architect when I was about 8 or 9 at a Girl Scout career fair. And part of that was as a young person, sort of like making the most of what I was given. My mom put me in Girl Scouts at a young age, and that career fair sort of sparked in me an interest in design. And my mom, who always really supported my dreams, started sending me to camps and to workshops that she heard about that were related to architecture or design. I attended a STEM camp at a local university, and I did the Explorer program at a local firm. I spent 2 weeks at an architecture camp, Girl Scout event in South Carolina. And I was the only girl in my drafting class in high school. And before I was looking at universities, I knew about different degree programs and had met several architects through these programs and engineers. And for me, like my mom believed that there was no opportunity that was out of reach despite location or cost. So lots of scholarships to things and just trying to maximize the opportunities that were available to me. So I like to set that sort of as a theme because I think, all of us are presented lots of things before us, but it's up to us to sort of make the most and make the best use of the opportunities that come before us. So I was introduced to the profession, and then I had to go to school. I had to figure out where I was going to go to school. So I ended up going to Howard, And I met a whole group of students there who were like me in aspiration. They wanted to become architects, but they were all very different. Like they had different backgrounds growing up, where they came from, and also what interested them in architecture. I met other Black architects who were practicing the profession. And then I was also in DC, so I got to see the impact of these architects and also regular citizens and what the impact they had in shaping their communities. Um, Getting a degree is great, but you also have to figure out how you're going to get a job. And so for me, that started with engaging organizations that were local to where I live. So I started uh, with the AIA in Richmond. And I like to remind people that, when you advance, it is part of your own strength. But for me, it was the strength of my network and the people that I supported, but also the people that were willing to support me. So I went to the AIA as a first step because, that's the organization for architects that's predominantly out there and that everyone hears about. And the staff person there at that local chapter ended up connecting me with a local architect, and he introduced me to one of his classmates who was actually getting ready to expand his firm from a single person to actually a staffed firm. And that's how I got my first job out of college. And then that sort of set the tone for the rest of my career because I had a really great experience there. I was with someone who really valued me as an architect and valued my ideas. They also really valued me as a person. And so like interactions with my family were encouraged, and sort of like I said, it set the tone for my career, and really sort of set the tone for what I looked for in positions after that. Also, because of that connection with the AIA chapter, I served in national positions at the AIA and at NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects, and came to rely on those networks as part of my career path. I could go into detail about my career path, but because this is sort of more focused on equity and diversity, I only wanted to touch on these, but I can go back and talk about that in the Q&A if people have specific questions. So I started out in a traditional firm, doing a lot of historic renovation and also museum work. I also did some community development and then veered full-fledged into development, um, which is shown a little bit here. So I was working with community groups that did affordable housing and built community infrastructure in San Francisco. Um, then I also came back from that experience and worked for a general contractor, so doing construction and managed commercial interior projects. And this is primarily where my path is right now because I work for a university managing construction projects sort of as the owner's rep. So I'm not necessarily being the architect on a day-to-day basis, but I'm hiring the architects and hiring the contractors and setting the tone for those projects, and making sure budgets and schedules and interactions with university staff and professors and all that stuff happens in the way that needs to make the projects happen. I also earned my license, which I mentioned that because I think that it's important for those starting out that even though I'm not in traditional practice, there's more than one way to be an architect. And for me, getting my license was important. I think going back to that time when I was a kid and starting to learn about architecture, licensure just seemed like that step that you had to do as part of your career, and always something that, no matter what I can do, no matter what I do, I always have my license. I can always tap into that and use that no matter where I am. So for those that don't know me, I have been one quarter of the group known as Riding the Vortex. And Riding the Vortex is a panel presentation that usually we have 4 or 5 women present. And we've done this at various conferences around the country. And the session started in 2007 when Katherine Prigmore was advising her mentee, Barbara Laurie, towards a tenure process at Howard University. And they created this panel presentation to highlight the stories of Black women architects. At the time, there was very little publicity about these women and their work, and there were also less than 200 licensed Black women architects. I met Barbara and Kathy prior to 2007 when I was a student back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they asked me to join the panel in the early career slot. And the vortex is a metaphor, particularly for African American women in architecture as we face racism, sexism, and other barriers throughout our career. So basically, this is a chance for us to talk about like how we're making it through the profession. At the sessions, each woman is at a different career stage. So we start with an early career, graduate, and then go up to executive level professionals. And we invite these different women to share their experience. We have maintained a core group, and we've done this now over 25 times since, like I said, we started in 2007. Um, and as you can see from the pictures, it's a really great experience for women to come together. Usually in some cities like DC, you have a large group of Black women architects, but in other places, a woman may be one of only, two or three in her city or in her location. So just having that connection is important. Over the years that we have conducted the panel, we've seen the number of African-American women architects more than double. So since the 13 years, or 14 years, I guess, since 2007, we've gone from 200 to now over 500. And in October of 2020 was when we actually crossed that 500 mark. The Directory of African-American Architects, created in the 1980s, has been crucial to allow us to track that number. And that's what you see here. The numbers basically come from the data kept there. And then this number just shows, I guess, that from the 80s through now, sort of the data and how the number has increased, and then showing the separation, the different numbers between men and women. So inviting other women to the panel also provided a launching pad for several women. So all of these women that you see here and that are listed have gone on to start the programs which you see listed. And really, like, they're all doing the same work of trying to advance Black women in architecture, trying to make the profession more diverse, trying to bring our voices out to the public, and make sure that we have platforms to let people know about us, let people know about our work, and also to connect with each other. The sessions have also provided an opportunity for women to realize that their experiences are similar to other, both good and bad. And I wanted to share, this is the contact information for anyone who's interested in connecting with us after the session. I also wanted to talk about just the numbers in general. So for me, equity and diversity starts with the numbers. So most of that data and those graphs that you see are stuff that I have been working on for probably when I got licensed. So I got licensed in 2010. And at that time, I really was like, what's the trend, right? I was around number 251 of the number of Black women architects. And I just wanted to know, like, how are we increasing? Are we increasing at a fast rate? Are we increasing at a slow rate? Like, what's that about? And so I really started to delve into the numbers and started writing every year sort of a state of sort of blog post about the numbers. And the African American Directory right now lists at 2,378 out of approximately 116,000 licensed architects in the US. So that percentage is about 2%, and it's been the same for about 10 years. So if we look at the percentage of African Americans in the US, which is about 13%, we would need another 13,000 Black architects to reach parity with our current population. And then when we look at the numbers per year, we can see that that number bounces up and down, every year. And a lot of this, there's a lot of factors that contribute to that. Economics probably being the largest one. So there are things like, are people working? Like, if you're not working, it's really hard to go get your hours that you need for your internship. It's really hard to think about taking money and paying for doing your exams. Also taking the time to study. If people are working, 50, 60-hour work weeks, it's really hard to carve out that time to study. And thinking about your firm and how they support you. So those are things that we've seen change, I think, from the time, at least for me, like from the time when I started my licensure process to now. Much more firms are, paying for licensure as an automatic thing for people that are sitting for the exams. The time thing, I don't know that we have any way of really like tracking like how people are feeling as far as like their time to take the exams and their time getting their internship hours. There have been a couple of surveys over the last couple of years that NCARB and other organizations have been doing. And I think some of that data is just now coming out as far as like, especially on people of color, whether it's African American, Latino, Asian, and how their sentiment is as far as what how they feel supported um, during their exam time or trying to get licensure. Other influences, I think, are like personal influences. So that includes starting a family, taking care of family, figuring out where you want to live. I mean, when you're starting on a career, people are thinking about, do they want to buy a house or buy a condo or those kind of things. And also like creating a social life for yourself beyond the profession. So I think all of that we can look at as influences on these numbers that we see here, and how what things that we need to think about as we talk about increasing those numbers. We've also seen an increase in the attempts programs to address that gap. And I just wanted to highlight NOMA's programs that they started over the last couple of years. So the fellowship, which I believe is in its second year or maybe like third iteration, I think, as far as partnering young architects with large firms across the country to give them internships and also stipends as they start their career. And then this year, as NOMA gets ready to celebrate their 50th anniversary, they initiated the 50/50 challenge to get 50 architects, Black architects licensed this year. So they're working with Black Spectacles to help provide study material for the exams. So for me, I think when I think about licensure and talking about myself, I also talk about my personal story and things that I have done around trying to increase the numbers. In addition to writing the Vortex, there's a lot of other things that I have pursued outside of my 9 to 5. And one of the things is like when I first started out of school, I had an essay published in a book that was part of an AIA Boston conference, and this was in 2014, called Where Are the Architects That Look Like Me? And that was really sort of me thinking about me stepping into a profession, stepping out of Howard, which was a majority Black environment, and stepping into a profession that was majority white, and trying to figure out where I could connect with architects who were like me. And for me, writing and presenting became an integral way for me to like process, for me to think about my where I was in my career, to speak out, and also to support others professionally. And so because of that, I continued writing, I continued trying to use my voice in that way. And I ended up being asked to edit several publications. So I edited an AIA publication, but I also edited the NOMA magazine for a little while. And really that time gave me the opportunity to sort of highlight architects and reach out to people who maybe wouldn't have told their story before, but to give them a platform to do that. This past year, that editing work led me to work with an author, Melvin Mitchell, another Howard grad, to publish his book, African American Architects, Embracing Culture and Building Urban Communities. And that 6-month journey sort of like tapped into my resources and tapped into my network, and also a vast depth of information online. And the book provides a thesis and steps to increase the number of African American architects in the US. And so if it's something that you are really thinking about, and also I think to the students as well, this is a really great book to give you a short history on African American architects in the US and their work, and sort of like how we got to the state that we are now, what firms that existed before, what firms existed now, how those legacies have carried forward. I also think that knowing the importance of licensure, for me, I ended up creating this website, Arc Stories, which is a way for architects to document their process of getting licensed. And I think again, like people go through this experience and they don't necessarily think about the fact that their experience is unique, and that they also have something to share with other people. So this website gives people that opportunity to share that little bit of time in their career, and also for them to reminisce on that period and appreciate the hard work they did to become licensed. And on the website, you can read over 20 stories about architects becoming licensed, I should say. My organizing work has also evolved to thinking about who is in our profession and how do we make sure that we as Black women are at the table and succeeding. And this is especially needed because just like Reynolds was talking about development projects and, thinking about development in the city where he grew up, we know that as Black architects, we come to communities differently. We come to communities with different priorities around projects. And especially when we think about predominantly Black communities and who is doing the architecture, who's doing the development there. So I started this event, the Black Women Architecture Brunch, which really was a way to connect women in the DC area. There's over 100 Black women architects, licensed and unlicensed, and designers through the profession in this area. And then one of the things that I realized when I first moved to the DC area and started working here was that we didn't know each other. We didn't have a way to really sort of be in the same room together. And that we did that first event, and we had 40 women show up, and we were kind of stuffed into this small conference room. And it was really exciting, like, to be all in the same room. And I think we need that. We need that for each other. We need to be mentoring each other. We need to be consultants to each other. We need to be partnering with each other so that we can advance in our work. And so that event helps us to do that and provide that opportunity for the network. And this year we actually did it nationally. So we had over 100 women on the event virtually, which again sort of like raises the profile and raises those connections in that network. Out of that event, we also created a scholarship for licensure. So again, once we started having the event and started realizing that we could generate funds by having this event, we sought to figure out a way to use that to help the people who were coming behind us. So that scholarship goes out to help people pay for their exams. So I wanted to say that that we're here, right? Like part of this talk about equity and diversity is about being seen. So I stole these pictures off of NOMA's Facebook page because for February they're highlighting Black architects. Thank you, Prescott. That we're here and we're thriving and we're creating firms with legacies like the Madisons, pictured here. And we're running firms or we're running offices like Renault, or having long and prosperous careers like Mr. Harris. And so I encourage you to not be swayed by the numbers. And if architecture is what you want to do, to keep on the path and to keep looking for those opportunities and to build your network, because that network, one, is going to help push you, but it's also going to help. Others around you see that you are advancing. And I also encourage people to think about those who are in front of you and beside you and behind you, because that's your network as well, and you want to be able to assist those people as your mentors assist you. I also just sort of, as I was thinking about this presentation, didn't want it to all be about like architecture and profession and like drilling that into the students especially, but also wanted to say that like you also want to think about having fun in your life, and that's important. So these are a few pictures, especially when I lived in San Francisco, because I think like our profession is great, but we need that outside time and that social time, because that's going to give you ideas as you think about design and as you think about doing things in your work. And for me, part of architecture is also thinking about my legacy. So thinking about my daughter and also thinking about this project that I'm pursuing on land that was a place where I grew up and spent my childhood with my grandmother and my grandparents. And how do I, as an architect, sort of like take what I've done, what I know, and sort of try to infuse that into this project. That is all I have. So if we have questions, I've seen the chat like blowing up, but I haven't been looking at it. So
yeah, there certainly are a lot of comments in the chat. But again, thank you, Katherine, for sharing. What courses did you excel in while in high school? That's one. And certainly we don't want to discourage people to think that they have to be statisticians or mathematicians necessarily, but I'm sure that was probably one of your courses that you did well. Geometry, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, I did well in school, so I can't. Someone asked me that the other day, like, what was my favorite course in school, and I was like, well, I like different ones for different reasons, right? So like my English class, even though like sometimes my grades weren't where I wanted them to be, like it challenged me, right? Because I had a teacher who like pushed me and was like, oh, well, you didn't think about this, or you didn't analyze this in that way, especially in like writing and literature. But then, yeah, the math stuff came to me relatively easy. So, I would be sitting in class and people would be asking questions and I'd be like, oh, it's like this, or like the teacher could explain it one way. And because I was understanding it, I could like explain it a different way to students to help them understand. So yeah, definitely a wide variety of things. And I think that even carries today, right? Because I have different interests and it just depends on like what day and time you catch me. I might say, oh yeah, I'm really interested in this today, or I'm really interested in that. So um uh yeah, I think
Well,
that's a hard one for me to answer, to say,
okay.
to pick one.
One of the students, I want to say his name was Ernest Dickerson. Perhaps he was a filmmaker that went to Howard Architecture. Again, an unconventional pursuit
Right.
after getting a start in a professional degree at Howard. We've got bankers that have come through the program. We also have Rose Fellows that have come through the program. That was your cue, Catherine, to say, "Hey,
You want me
I'm
to
one
talk
of
about
them."
the Rose Fellowship?
Of course, of course, of course. That's something I didn't know about you. So
Oh,
that came
okay,
up in
okay.
the chat. Garfield
Oh,
shared that you
yes,
you went to California to do community development as a Rose
yes.
Fellow. Very
Yes.
notable.
So, yeah, so that was like my career stuff. I kind of like really I didn't go into detail about that. So, yeah, I
Mhm.
had been in traditional firms, and I think part of it was coming out of DC and being in DC at Howard, was that I saw the city, and at the time, I guess in the late 90s, DC was still like recovering, which I mean, I didn't know at the time, but recovering from like the all of the unrest of the 60s and how blocks had
Mm,
been burned out and had
right.
never been rebuilt. So when I showed up and saw these buildings that were abandoned, I was like, why are these buildings sitting here like boarded up and stuff like that when you have homeless people and people who want to live in the city? So I think school helped me understand that. But then when I got into the profession, it was really hard to work in a firm, in a traditional firm, and not see architects like being the makers and the instigators of those projects. So the
Mm,
Rose Fellowship allowed me to jump to the development side, where I could use my architecture skills, but start to really learn how development organizations and developers instigate the projects, right? So if you see a building or you see a piece of land and you're like, I want to put something there, that building is sitting there abandoned, and I think that it could be, an ice cream shop, or it could be a home for someone. How do you actually like put the project together, go get the funding and do the drawings and figure out what the zoning is and all that kind of stuff to make that project happen? And I think in architecture school, that's a little bit missing. I know that that conversation is still there, but I think when I went to school, like it wasn't talked about, right? That you can go and be the developer, and what are all the pieces that you need to actually put together to make that happen. So that was frustrating when I got out. And so when I had the opportunity to apply and go into the Rose Fellowship, I jumped at that because I was like, oh, I can go and actually like learn development and learn how these projects are put together. And
mhm,
I was actually really lucky that my mentor at the organization that I was at when I was sort of the last half of my fellowship, like she went to school for architecture. So even though she wasn't a licensed architect, she had that background. And so she kind of the same way was like coming from an architect side into the development world. And so she was really good about like showing and telling me and sort of mentoring me through that process and helping me sort of like figure out like how to do that process, and then working with other our development consultants and like our real estate agent, and just like learning, like once it's built, like, right, somebody has to sell it or somebody has to rent it. So, just talking with the real estate agent for some of our projects and like the things that she was doing, it's a whole other world that as architects, again, we don't necessarily think
right,
about, like what happens after that building gets built and somebody has to move into it. Who's going to make sure that that actually happens?
right.
So yeah.
Well, one of the architects I admire here in the Atlanta area, Monica Fenderson, who's involved in Noma Atlanta specifically, has a recent blog which speaks to the same thing, which is how architects need to be more vested in participating in
Mhm.
the development process not only just from the perspective of the inception of any given project, but also as an equity partner.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I've done and certainly look forward to doing more of is investing in projects and hopefully being more part of the development process as an equity partner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think architects in general could benefit more from that. So to your point, it'd be great to hear more about women, people of color becoming vested in how projects not only are conceived, but the value that these projects generate.
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
that value changes communities.
right, right. And
Yep.
it gives you the chance to, it gives you, like, for me, I like to say that as the architect, we were always waiting for the clients, right? So
Right.
as the developer, as
Right.
the equity
Right.
partner, even if you're putting in the sweat equity, right? Like your architecture time could be sweat equity into a partnership. It doesn't necessarily have to always be you coming to the table with cash.
Correct.
It gives you the chance to actually like decide what's going to happen, versus waiting for someone with the money or the idea to come to you.
Sure. Sure, sure. And then with your background as an architect, as a designer, you can influence the value of what's created, the
Right.
value of the aesthetic, the value of, and I'm not just talking about the monetary value, but the value of how that project is perceived by a community, um, the value of how that project vests in any given community to improve the quality of life for the people that it impacts.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So, that's something that dovetails, what Renaud shared in terms of, the community partnerships he shared between his firm and how some of the projects that he shared were evolved and were conceived and who they gave homage to. It's invaluable to us to have you share not only your background, your experience, and your insights, but to bring to life the fact that I am a woman, not me, but but you sharing as a woman your experiences, even some of the challenges, but how more importantly you're overcoming those challenges to be able to help bear a resemblance of people like you in the profession and bring along those that look like you into the profession.
Mm-hmm.
So that much is invaluable, despite the fact that you do excellent work, and I've seen you inspire students, even browbeat them a little bit, which professors are known to do. But more importantly, inspire students that I've seen you touch at Howard. The lecture that I've seen, the lectures rather that I've seen, and the few times that I've had a chance to work with you at our alma mater. So again, thank you. Let's see.
I would say I'll go to well, how do you encourage young women to go into the field? I see Lorinda's question about encouraging women, even though they may not have the educational foundation. So I would say that I don't. That's I don't like to say that someone doesn't have the educational foundation, because I feel like that's something that you can always make up. Like even if someone has to start out at community college because whatever their high school experience was, they feel like they're not ready to jump right into a program. That if I think it's more about having the passion about what you want to do, right? So if architecture is something that you really are passionate about, and building communities is something that you're really passionate about, and you see architecture as your way to do that, I wouldn't let the educational part dissuade you, because there are people who, you know, there are people like me who I went through a 5-year program and, got through that 5-year program and jumped out and got into the workforce. And there are people who take longer getting through that path. And I think as long as you're moving forward, I would say definitely like get into whatever is the best situation for you as far as the education, but then also like look for opportunities to do things like interns. So even if that's like going to an architecture firm and you're in the mailroom, or you're helping them build models, or you're helping, whatever that situation is, or you're, young people can connect with our professional organizations, right? So it's not a thing like the AIA and NOMA. They have webinars and they have tours, hopefully when we can all be together outside in person again.
Right, right, right.
So, young people can participate in those things, and you can start, just like Renal talked about him as a 14-year-old connecting.
Yeah.
I had several programs when I was in middle school and high school. And so going to those programs helped me meet architects. And I think you got to look for those opportunities, and whatever your education is, like, jump in where you are and figure out what you need, and who you need to either like tutor you or help or mentor you to get to where you want to be. I would say don't let that dissuade you from pursuing it.
Right. And I will highlight the two of the things that you shared in your excellent response. The chat is certainly lit up with comments. The last one I saw was excellent response, and I would echo that sentiment. And I would say that out of your response, I'll pick out two things that I think are pretty critical: exposure in education,
Mhm.
exposure in being able to be exposed to the profession or facets of the profession, development, engineering, architecture, design, interior design, even the
Right.
trades of building.
Yep.
Being exposed to those things kind of gives people an idea of what their passion may become. My route to that was Legos. I love Legos. And behind me, I have Legos for
I see.
all the cities that I've been to. I collect the Lego sets for those
Yeah.
cities. But beyond exposure, it's education. And, noting that the education for architects is a little different than, the experiences that other programs, other students may have, let's say, for instance, in the School of Business. Our programs are collaborative.
Yep.
You've highlighted this, Renald's highlighted the fact that, being an architect is part and parcel being part of a team.
Yep.
And that starts in our studios. So there have been times when, Garfield, for instance, has helped me with my studio project. I've helped Garfield with his studio projects. Renald, and we're contemporaries in that we matriculated through Howard around the same time.
Mhm.
And that's not to say that if we were there when you were there, we would have been part of that same cohort, because that's the synergy of working through studio projects, working through the architectural programs. Studio
So
becomes very interactive, very
so
well.
I'll interrupt you there and just say that I think that's a unique Howard experience. Maybe that's a unique HBCU experience, because having heard or seen other people post about their
Interesting.
projects being sabotaged in studio really sort of like
Interesting.
really sort of
At other
disheartened me
schools?
at other schools. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Someone was
Wow.
like, and someone was like, "Oh yeah, that's typical." I was like, "No, that is not typical. Like that is not what people do."
Wow. Wow.
And these are
Well,
a PWI institution, so maybe that happens there, but I feel
well, here's a
like the
plug for Howard
experience,
University.
right? I feel like our
Yeah.
experience was never about, like, yes, we were in competition with each other
Right.
in studio and that kind of thing, but at the end of the day, like if someone needed help, like there was going to be somebody there to help them. And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
think definitely thinking
Yeah.
about your educational experience and where you go and what you get out of that definitely helps propel you in your career, and like what you think about is like the usual studio experience, and also like how you develop that collaborative team mindset, right? If you're at a
Right.
school where that is not there at all, then it's very hard when you get out into the working world and you have to be the architect and the engineer and the contractor, and you all have to like get along with, even though your personalities are different, and different people are coming with different priorities for the project, you all have to like work together or it's not going to get done. And
Right.
so I think our experience at Howard definitely helped build that, versus maybe other people's experiences.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's also a plug, and it underscores, because that's what we know.
Yeah,
It underscores the value of our HBCUs,
yeah,
because I think that that's a common thread through the experiences that a number of our cohorts have had at HBCU programs that have architectural degree offerings.
Yeah.
So, where we have a healthy competition. We do help motivate each other and encourage each other to excel, but we don't want to see each other flounder. We don't
Right.
want to see each other fail, especially with those that we find have the passion, have an interest, and want to do well. There have been numerous occasions where late nights in studio, we've got music playing loud.
Yep.
We're up late drafting, helping each other
Yes.
kind of think through ideas, parties, concepts, etc. So,
Yeah.
that then I think has laid the foundation for my professional development and for the professional development of those like yourself, Garfield, Renald, who then help or who have become leaders
Yeah.
in how they execute projects and in their professional endeavors.
Yeah, I will say it
Lorinda
definitely
has her hand up.
Oh,
So I'd
Lorinda,
love to allow her to talk if that's okay with you guys.
That'd be fantastic.
Yes.
And this is almost a mini reunion, so it's kind of hard to get away from. It pains me.
Lorinda
take a
is
step back
on
from
now.
the dialogue.
Hey,
Lorinda, thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
thank you so much, Catherine. What I was like referring to was that, and I didn't mean to like phrase it maybe like in a negative way about maybe, some like minority students not having like the educational, background, but like most, and I don't want to say even most, but like in some of our schools, like our children are not exposed to the maths and the sciences, and especially like minority women are sometimes like discouraged from like certain kind of fields. What kind of advice would you give, especially minority women, going into, I guess, quote unquote, non-traditional fields like architecture, since that, like the field is predominantly dominated by 80% white males. So like what kind of encouragement would you give our females, young women or women like, that's trying to enter the field, just words of encouragement?
I mean, that they can do it. Like, I mean, like 500 of us have, so they can do it. And I would say, like, one of the things about being in a place like Atlanta or being in Washington, D.C. is that there is a large group of Black architects, and to start connecting with them, and figure out, meet some of them, figure out who is there to support you and who you can find as a mentor. I think that's a very important thing, to have someone that you can come and ask questions to when as you're going through the profession. So that's kind of, that's what I would say. I mean, I hope that someone, isn't just, I know that there's a lot of ways that you can get discouraged in the profession. But I think, like, for me, I've always like leaned back on my network, just like these guys are talking about. Garfield and I have known each other for, we were talking the other day, probably like maybe 15 years or so, because we weren't at Howard at the same time, but we met when I was working in the Richmond area in Virginia. And so just maintaining like those connections, we see each other annually at like the NOMA conference. Yep. And just like catch up on what everybody's doing. And for me, like, that's been like crucial, having the network of the people who are my peers, but then also having the people who are, a little bit older than me, as far as like giving me advice on my career, having the people that are a little bit younger than me, so I can see like what's new and upcoming in the field, and just maintaining like that constant like cross connection and cross conversation, and having people that when you have an issue, like I have, I would say like when I was going through the exam, one of our colleagues, Brian Hudson, was doing his exam at the same time. So we would call each other back and forth and like, hey, I'm getting ready to do this exam. Like, what did you do? What things did you read? And that kind of support network really helped me sort of like, and helps me to this day, like get through, when I'm having issues. I have a couple of colleagues who, like me, are at universities. They're architects and they're at universities. And so now that I've been sort of in this university role for a year, and I call them and be like, hey, this is what's happening in my project. Like, do you have any advice? Or this is, something that I'm dealing with as far as my work coworker or my boss or something like that. And so finding other people who are in your same sort of like similar vein of what you're doing, and connecting with them and using that network is really important.
Awesome. Good. Thank you.
Well, one of the things I'll add is the fact that there are a number of different programs, and I was just typing this into the chat. There are a number of different programs that expose students
Yes.
to architecture, or architecture and the allied professions, disciplines, and trades.
Yeah, Renald mentioned
Project
Project Pipeline. I did the Explorer program when I was in high school. So that's a program out of, it's actually a Boy Scout program, but it's the Boy Scouts have this career exploration program. And so in my city, it was a local architecture firm. And they did that program for, I think, like 10 weeks. So we went to their firm once a week in the evening, and over that 10 weeks they taught us various different things about architecture, including like getting on CAD and learning about a job site and going over drawings. And so I think there are programs out there like that. And so if you're a young person, or if you're a parent of a young person, look for those programs so that you can expose your kids to them.
And I would be remiss,
ACCI, yes.
not to mention ACCI, the program right here, where we're sharing and exposing. Go ahead, Dr.
Let me talk to this for a hot sec. I mean, I love to hear this conversation, because exposure is exactly why the Atlanta Center for Creative Inquiry was started by Oscar over 15 years ago. And we've been doing just that, working with young people, high school students, working with college students who participate as mentors, working with professionals who come in and participate during our summer academies, working with educators out in the high schools, influencing curriculums, trying to introduce students to architecture in the classroom, working with firms who host our students for firm tours, working, our students have contractors actually toured the Mercedes-Benz while it was under construction. So that is the very reason why Oscar started the program. And I'm here to say that programs like the Atlanta Center for Creative Inquiry, we would love for your students to engage us now that we're doing a virtual platform. Our goal is to expose and do the exact same things that Katherine is talking about. So I love the direction.
Very well said. Certainly appreciate you coming on to underscore what we do, why we do it, and how that really is an extension of each one reaching one and each one teaching one.
Damon, one other question that was in the chat was asking about BWA and is it connected to WIA? So BWA, Black Women in Architecture Network, and Women in Architecture is usually a program under AIA chapters and also nationally, and BWA is independent from that. We sort of started, so we started writing the Vortex as the session. And then at the time we felt like, or I felt like there needed to be a way to sort of like link all these groups that were doing work around Black women in architecture. So the BWA website sort of started from that, sort of my documentation, and then just wanting to have a place where if someone was interested, like they could go and see, like, here are all the groups that are like doing something around Black women in architecture. And then we also linked to, some allied groups like NOMA and other groups that aren't necessarily focused on Black women, but maybe focused on other people of color or Black people or that kind of thing. So that's kind of where that came out of. And then the scholarship and all that kind of thing is kind of like all fallen under that umbrella as a way to sort of like capture all the things that I and some of my colleagues are doing. So that was Candace had asked that question. So I just wanted to address that. Yeah.
I've got a couple last questions as we start to wrap up this portion of our seminar. I want to make sure that, and I don't want to assume this, but I want to make sure I know what that background is behind you.
It's in a Mac, of course. It's an interior photo of the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And obviously that was designed by an African-American. Well,
A team.
yeah, there was certainly a team, but I'm trying to think if I believe, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, David.
David Adjaye.
Oh,
David
David
Adjaye.
Adjaye, Phil Freelon, Max
Phil
Bond.
Freelon. Yep.
Right. Absolutely. So, beautiful background.
I stole it.
Well, no, it works well. It works well. Katherine, thank you for joining us today.